Just give some heartfelt thanks for their support. And this evening signals a new and abiding relationship between Loyola Marymount University and material support from the Jain community. And Dr. Nitin Shah is going to share a little bit of the story of how we're all gathered here this evening.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, everybody. And when Jains talk to others, we usually start by greeting saying, Jai Jinendra. It's just a way like many other people do in different ways. Our relationship go back many years, and it certainly has taken as many years to get around here, but we are very happy that we are here finally. And we are here as a partnership with Sikh religion, probably first of its kind, where somebody will come and teach. One person, one professor will teach two different religions. And we are very thankful to Loyola Marymount University and Professor Chepal to help and arrange this opportunity for us. And this happens to be the historic first event where you all are part of.
I will say more. Yeah. I think all of you know the significance of the year 1893 in Chicago. And most of us are very familiar with the speech given by Swami Vivekananda. And I think all of us have seen the photographs and wondered who that handsome guy was with the turban and on the other side of the stage, and his name was Gandhi. And he was a young merchant scholar who also spoke at the Parliament of the World Religions. And he spoke eloquently about the Jain faith. And the Jain faith, of course, is very ancient, older than Buddhism. The hallmark, the observance of nonviolence. And this religion really kept to itself. Some Germans learned a bit about it, Jacobi, and then his student Schubring did some work that was slow to make it into the English language. A lot of it isn't even in English yet. And then a professor came, Pavanab Jaini, of dual Hindu-Jain background, and he had left his family to become a Buddhist monk in Sri Lanka. Ended up going to SOAS in London, where I was just gave a talk a couple of weeks ago, as a scholar of Buddhism. And then late in his life, he published a book, or later in his life, he published a book called The Jain Path of Purification. And I had the great honor of inviting him to Stony Brook University in the year 1984, just before moving to Los Angeles. And as he stayed over at my house, and as we were just entranced with both his presentation about Jainism, but also reading his book, he consequently inspired a whole generation of young scholars that have taken Jainism to heart as an area of study. And going back more than 10 years, we from Loyola Marymount have been sending students, some of them here tonight with us, to study Jainism in India. We have access that unimaginable just a decade ago. You would have to, I don't know, you just would not have the calling card to go to the places where we go and to meet with the religious leaders that we meet with and to be in the presence of senior scholars. Andrea's been part of this. Chris Miller's been part of this. Jeff, have you gone yet? Okay, so it's a wonderful opportunity, and if you're a scholar, all of the hospitality expenses are covered and you get a stipend. If you're a professor, perhaps graduate student. We have a program for undergrads. And then our graduate students here at Loyola Marymount in the Master of Arts of Yoga Studies travel, and our group has their visas, and we're getting ready to go again this year. They're a little bit scared, but I hope it's going to be okay. So this field is a relatively new field. And there is now an annual conference that is held in London. And what we are doing by the creation of this new funded position in Sikh and Jain studies is moving toward recruiting another scholar onto our faculty who will have that dual responsibility. And we're, for both traditions, working with living communities. We just recently attended the dedication of the second Jain temple in Southern California. It's in Tahunga, which is where Chris Miller here grew up. And they've taken over an old, I think it was an old Elks Hall, was it? Yeah, and they're converting it, and we had the foundation stone blessing ceremony. And then for years and years now, there's a rebuilt Jain Center in Buena Park, where many of us have visited and enjoyed. And what we're moving toward tonight is this lecture, endowed lecture, named in honor of Vivekananda Gandhi. And I will introduce the speaker momentarily, but Nitin is going to give a couple of more thanks to people that are really organizing and pulling all of this opportunity together for us all.
Thank you, Chris. And if I may, before I do that, a few more sentences about Virchow Raghavji Gandhi. As per Jain knowledge, he was the first Jain to land in the United States of America. Over his 3 or 4 trips, he gave 535 lectures in the United States and Europe. And he not only spoke on Jain religion, he defended women's treatment in India, because that was under a great attack in 1893 from other contemporary religions of that time. So he was really a hero for us and practiced Anikantvad, which is a real second principle, as we call it, besides Ahimsa of Jain religion, which is multiplicity of views. There are many different views. No one is right and no one is wrong. So that's about the lectures that we're going to listen to from Dr. Jain. And we certainly have the president of Jain Center of Southern California sitting with us, Virendra Bhai, if I may recognize him. Thank you for taking time and coming. The International Summer School of Jain Studies, until last year, 450 people have gone over 10 years, and this year there are already 80 signed up, 80. We'll be going, including Chris, of course. The originator of it, Dr. Sulek Jain, is the sponsor of this lecture as well. So please, round of applause to Dr. Sulek and Mrs. Jain. And lastly, I invite all of you to come and visit the beautiful Jain Center of Southern California. And you will have 3 surprises. 1, the architecture from outside. 2nd, the temple area that you will see. And the 3rd, we house the only one of its kind wooden temple in our temple. That's the only place available, which is 110 years old now. Built in 1904, 1905, was brought in at that time, and we have them in Buena Park. Thank you, Chris.
This is a homecoming for Andrea Jain, who I'm sure says Jane. And she's local. She's, I should say, an American born, correct?
Right.
And she can tell a little bit of her story if she so chooses, but from Texas.
Yeah.
By birth.
Not by birth.
Okay, but grew up in Texas.
Yeah.
And she did her, just as she was starting as a graduate student, she was here. And we inaugurated the South Asia Studies Association conferences, which are held intermittently. And it was one of your very first, correct?
Yeah, one of my first conferences.
Yeah, and she gave a talk. It was wonderful. And she also participated in the International School for Jain Studies, one of the summers where I was there. So we know each other from here, we know each other from there. And she actually now holds, and this is a little bit of ancient history, but many, many years ago, decades ago, I had applied to a job at the University of Indiana, Purdue University, Indianapolis. I didn't get that job, okay?
That's funny title.
But this is the job that she now holds, because the person that got it retired. Okay? So it makes me feel like quite the youngster, I don't know. But it is very heartening to see generationally that these good studies are moving forward. As I say, Jain Studies is very, very young. And she's been a pioneer within this. And she will share with you the story of how Jainism continues to reinvent itself even within India in light of social change, in light of philosophical change, and in light of the spiritual landscape constantly shifting. Her book, Selling Yoga, is available in the back. We also have some flyers for it if you'd like to order it on discount as part of this special event. We will be doing a session on this book at the American Academy of Religion, which is being held in Atlanta. So we will be talking about this book in Atlanta. And the wonder of what she has done is really provide an inclusive look of what is happening with yoga across many different traditions. And she's also, for the second time, going to be the mother of a son. So, if in case you don't want to ask, I just want to say this is the last time she's allowed to get on an airplane for a little bit. So, for a while. So, Andrea, please, I welcome you.
Great, thank you.
Her PhD is from Rice University in Texas.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it. So thank you so much for coming tonight, and especially after a long day with a lot of really great papers. And I want to make sure everybody can hear me. Can you hear me? Am I close enough? Okay, great. So the title of my paper tonight, Jain Modern Yoga and the Quest for Authenticity, the Yoga Sutra and the Thought of Vivekananda, Gandhi, Swami Vivekananda, and other modern yoga thinkers. So I'll be talking about Jain traditions as well as some other, and comparing to some other modern yoga proponents. In the popular imagination, the Yoga Sutra serves as the yoga's ur-text. Consider, for example, a statement about yoga on a PBS website featuring a special series entitled The Story of India. Seals from the Indus Valley civilization dating to the 3rd millennium BCE depict what appear to be yogic poses. Bhagavad Gita, Puranas, and Mahabharata are among the texts that describe yoga's teachings, which were codified at about 150 BCE in the Yoga Sutra, written by Patanjali. This idea is not just American, but is perpetuated transnationally. Consider the following from the official website for the Ministry of Yoga for the Government of India. Maharishi Patanjali, rightly called the father of yoga, compiled and refined various aspects of yoga systematically in his Yoga Sutras. He advocated the Eightfold Path of Yoga, popularly known as Ashtanga Yoga, for all-around development. These steps are believed to have the potential for improvement of physical health by enhancing circulation of oxygenated blood in the body, retaining the sense organs, thereby inducing tranquility and serenity of mind. The practice of yoga prevents psychosomatic disorders and improves an individual's resistance and ability to endure stressful situations. So all of this is attributed to the Yoga Sutra. My talk tonight would like to address the question, who were the key modern yoga players to propound and later popularize this idea, and why did they do so? This idea that the Yoga Sutra is yoga's ur-text, and that Patanjali is the father of yoga. So just to summarize the 3 main points that I hope to touch on. First of all, or my three main goals, I want to situate the Yoga Sutra in the thought of the 19th century Hindu thinker Swami Vivekananda and his Jain contemporary, and in many ways his Jain analog, Vivekananda Gandhi. I'll then evaluate the text's place in 20th century or late 20th century modern yoga systems, with a focus on the Jain system of Prekshya Dhyana and on Iyengar yoga. And I hope to demonstrate that modern yoga proponents have mythologized their relationship to the Yoga Sutra for very specific reasons, from establishing authority based on a transmission going back to the Yoga Sutra, to suggesting that the Yoga Sutra coincides with what is included both in proponents' modern systems and in even earlier authoritative sources for those systems. In all cases, however, the claim to authority and authenticity through associating modern yoga with the ancient knowledge of the Yoga Sutra serves to ground a worldview instead of values, and therefore fulfills a mythological function. So I wanted to show you just a few book covers here. These are the four main texts I'll be drawing from. The first one is Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. The second one, Gandhi's The Yoga Philosophy, which is really a collection of his talks on yoga.
Vivekananda Gandhi, right?
Vivekananda Gandhi.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did I?
No, you said Gandhi, so I wasn't.
Oh, I just wanted to clarify. Vivekananda Gandhi. Yeah, anytime I say Gandhi here, it's Vivekananda Gandhi. Mahapragya of the Jain Therapants, Lord Mahavira's Scripture of Health, and B.K. Iyengar's Light on Yoga. All right, so here's that picture we were talking about. Vivekananda and Gandhi at the 1893 Parliament of the World's Religions. We've got Vivekananda here in the middle, and Gandhi there on the far right side. Vivekananda, a figure you are all probably familiar with, was a 19th century Hindu reformer, missionary to the United States, and Indian nationalist who promoted a modern interpretation of Advaita Vedanta, often termed Neo-Vedanta. Vivekananda Gandhi, who you may or may not be equally familiar with, was a 19th century Jain thinker, missionary to the United States and the United Kingdom, and Indian nationalist. Trained as a lawyer, Gandhi gained the status of a very high-profile Jain in India through advocacy for various Jain causes. For example, he had a pig slaughterhouse closed that had been opened near a Bengali Jain pilgrimage site. He wrote and lectured extensively on the Jain religion, as well as broader religious themes, topics, and issues, with special attention to what he considered the superior ethical guidelines provided by Indian religions. In her important study of modern yoga, A History of Modern Yoga, Elizabeth de McKillis refers to Vivekananda's book, Raja Yoga, which was published in 1896, as the seminal text of modern yoga. While I resist reifying modern yoga by identifying a single formative source, instead I prefer an approach to the history of modern yoga based on a vision of separate streams woven together. There is no doubt that Raja Yoga did and continues to serve as a major influential role in the history of modern yoga. In that text, Vivekananda prescribes a narrow vision of yoga that he terms Raja Yoga, or royal yoga. Though the term had various other meanings in many medieval and pre-colonial yoga texts, including, for example, ecstatic sensual rapture in one tantric text, Vivekananda uses the term to refer only to what he considers authentic yoga according to his Advaita Vedantic selective reading of the Yoga Sutra. In fact, Vivekananda focused on the practical dimension of the Yoga Sutra, Ashtanga Yoga. So it wasn't even that he narrowly focused on the Yoga Sutra, but even narrower than that, really focused on the Eightfold Path. So when Vivekananda suggests the aphorisms of Patanjali are the highest authority on Raja Yoga and form its textbook, what he means is that Ashtanga Yoga, according to the Yoga Sutra, serves as the textbook on Raja Yoga. In Yoga Philosophy, a collection of talks delivered by Gandhi on the topic of yoga, Gandhi emphasizes the role of yoga as a key source of ethics and goes on to suggest that the vow of nonviolence is yoga's first and preeminent step. A very the preeminent ethical guideline in the Jain religion more broadly. More specifically, he emphasizes the importance of vegetarianism and cites Mahavira as a model of this ethical injunction. Gandhi's approach to yoga shared with Vivekananda's approach the assumption that the Yoga Sutra was the most ancient systematic source on yoga practice. And so by yoga, by the term yoga, Gandhi means the yoga prescribed in the Yoga Sutra. Also in accordance with Vivekananda, Gandhi emphasizes the importance of yoga practice as prescribed he emphasizes yoga practice, the practical dimension of the Yoga Sutra. Yoga philosophy, according to Gandhi, the mysticism of India then is the complement of the Sankhya. The really important improvement on the Sankhya consists in the highly practical character of the rules laid down for acquiring eternal bliss and knowledge. So the key component of the Yoga Sutra for Gandhi is the practical component. Vivekananda and Gandhi both turned to the Yoga Sutra, and more specifically the Ashtanga Yoga, the practice-oriented component, in a way that serves two functions. First, it allows them to situate within their own respective philosophical traditions yoga. In other words, it allows them to impose their own respective philosophical systems on this practice-oriented section of the text. Jain dualism, for example, shapes Gandhi's interpretation of the definition of yoga as found in the Yoga Sutra. Quote, and this is Gandhi, "Yoga is the suppression of the manifestation of the mind. The source of the positive power, therefore, lies in the soul. In the very wording of the definition of yoga is involved the supposition of the existence of a power which can control and suppress the manifestations of the mind. This power is the power of the soul, otherwise familiar to us as freedom of the will. So long as the soul is subject to the mind, it is tossed this way or that in obedience to the mental changes. Instead of the soul being tossed by the mental changes, the mind should vibrate in obedience to the soul vibrations. When once the soul becomes the master of the mind, it can produce any manifestation it likes." End quote. Second, the emphasis on the practical dimension of the Yoga Sutra made it possible for Vivekananda and Gandhi to universalize and modernize yoga, and therefore make it relevant, meaningful, and useful to their audiences, primarily made up of participants in modern mesmeric, harmonial, and other modern spiritual movements. In their efforts to appeal to these audiences interested in modern science and the pursuit of physical and psychological health, Vivekananda and Gandhi did invoke some components of Hatha Yoga, in addition to the Ashtanga Yoga of the Yoga Sutra, but they did so on their own terms. Basically, they both appropriated the notion of the subtle body, which they argued had correspondences in the physical body, as mapped out in modern anatomy and physiology. In this way, they argued, subtle energy could function as a healing agent. Health benefits, however, were inferior to what both considered the true aim of yoga, spiritual development. Vivekananda, for example, offers a modern Advaita Vedantic model, which is based on the idea that only when all physical powers and attainments are left behind will the yoga adept be able to reach an altogether transcendent state, the Advaitic state of total identification with the self. On the topic of Hatha Yoga practices, he explains, quote, "We have nothing to do with it here because its practices are very difficult and cannot be learned in a day, and after all, do not lead to much spiritual growth." End quote. Gandhi likewise suggests, quote, "In the intermediate stages between contemplation, absorption, and samadhi, the student of yoga can, if he likes, so fix his mind as to put it in direct communion with nature, and in this state it obtains all the occult powers that are ascribed to the yogis of India. As our time this evening," of course this was a lecture he delivered, as the time this evening is limited, and as the author of the Yoga Sutras himself says that these occult powers are often all positive obstacles in the way of highest samadhi, whose proper nature and import is that state in which the soul sees itself, I shall at once pass to the main goal, the end and aim of yoga, Kaivalya." End quote. So moving ahead to the late 20th century then, it It was not long after Vivekananda and Gandhi disseminated their views on yoga beyond India's borders and cited the Yoga Sutra as the authoritative source before many more Indian gurus made access to their yoga systems easier by not requiring disciples to come to them in isolated monastic contexts, but instead going out into the world and actively marketing their yoga systems. Many of these earliest widely marketed yoga systems are examples of what I term modern soteriological yoga, or what De Michelis would have categorized as modern denominational yoga. These systems, unlike today's most widely popularized systems of modern postural yoga, have emphasized traditional devotion to guru figures and have maintained a strict organizational structure and doctrinal commitments. Maharishi's Transcendental Meditation, Prabhupada's ISKCON, or International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Guru Anjali's Raja Yoga, and Muktananda's Siddha Yoga, those are just a few examples, all became increasingly known within and beyond India in the 1970s. A modern variety of Jain Yoga, Preksha Dhyan, emerged. Mahapragya, the former Acharya, the monastic leader, of the Jain Shwekambara Therapant, pictured here, introduced Preksha Dhyan, what I suggest is a hybrid of modern soteriological and modern postural yoga, and sought to diffuse it both within and beyond India. To understand the extent to which the introduction of Preksha Dhyana was radical from the perspective of traditional Jain thought, and especially traditional Therapant thought, one must consider the history of the sect. So I'll just give you a little bit of background here. Bhikshu, the founder and first Acharya of the Jain Therapant in Rajasthan, maintained that the Jain commitment to ahimsa, or non-violence, is about the purification of the soul and its quest toward release from the body. Bhikshu was a Shwekambara reformer who left his order in 1759, arguing that the Jain monastic path had moved away from its original teachings, the teachings of Mahavira, the historical founder of the Jain tradition. He argued that authentic ascetic behavior included wearing the mukhati, or mouth shield, rejecting image worship, and observing elaborate fasting. Bhikshu also insisted that the total authority of a single acharya was necessary as a part of the Reformation process in order to prevent schisms or laxity in monastic behavior. He established a new order in 1760 and called it the Therapant, asserting that it returned to Mahavira's dualist ontology, which deems the material world to be inherently violent, and has its logical end in ascetic religious practice that involves the reduction and eventual elimination of all physical and social action. Today, the Therapant continues to function as a Shwekambara Jain sect that, in contrast to most other Jain sects, but in accordance with Vivekananda and Gandhi's methods, is a proselytizing organization. Its current status is the culmination of numerous modern innovations during the acharyaship of the ninth acharya, Tulsi, between 1936 and 1994. Tulsi led an ecumenical campaign for global peace in response to what he deemed a violent world plagued by modernity. Beginning around 1943, as World War II raged on, Tulsi showed concern over the dreadful state of global affairs and began a quest to increase his social engagement, suggesting the Jain path was a universal solution to the world's problems. All of this occurred despite the Therapant position that monastics should not engage in worldly action, that they should withdraw from society and from what Tulsi himself referred to as the vomit of worldly affairs. On March 2nd, 1949, Tulsi founded the Anuvrat, or Lesser Vows movement, dedicated to, quote, taking Jainism beyond the Jains, unquote. It's a common phrase you hear within the Jain Shwekambara Therapant. The Anuvrat movement prescribed the 5 Jain vows, non-violence, truth-telling, non-stealing, celibacy, and non-attachment, which are shared with Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga, for all people. So it was prescribed for Jains and non-Jains alike. In 1970, Tulsi established Jain Vishwa Bharati, a global organization for disseminating Therapant ideology and practice, while adapting the sect to changes in the modern world. It was at the first JVB, Jain Vishwa Bharati, or JVB, center in Ladnu, Rajasthan, that one of Tulsi's closest disciples, the monk Muni Natma, played a vital role in yet another Therapant innovation. Natmal received permission from Tulsi to take leave from his regular monastic duties in order to study ancient Jain scriptures in search of a lost form of Jain yoga. In 1975, Natmal introduced Pariksha Dhyana, literally concentration of perception, but translated by insiders to the tradition as insight meditation in yoga. With similar rhetoric as Vivekananda and Gandhi about their respective yoga systems, Natmal suggested that Pariksha Dhyana was a universal system that had been lost and was now rediscovered, that it was grounded in science, and that his rediscovery was confirmed by his personal experiences. Tulsi honored Natmal by giving him a new name, Mahaprajna, or Great Wisdom, and Mahaprajna was initiated as the 10th Acharya in 1994 and continued in that role until his recent death in 2010. On the one hand, the introduction of Pariksha Dhyana was not particularly innovative because it was consistent with other trends that many Rajasthanis would have been familiar with in the 1970s, namely modern systems of both soteriological and postural yoga were increasingly diffused within and beyond India's borders. On the other hand, Pariksha Dhyana was a radical innovation because, in contrast to the body-denying, society-denying, and world-denying Jain ascetic ideal propounded by the Jain Trikambara Therapant, Pariksha Dhyana included modern systems of diet and physical exercise in the form of postures aimed at health. Furthermore, Mahaprajna's construction of Pariksha Dhyana demonstrated the phenomenon whereby postural yoga somaticizes a system that was traditionally a metaphysical practice oriented around the manipulation of subtle energies. And Joseph Alter has written extensively on that subject. The Therapant Acharya required all monastics to practice Pariksha Dhyana and prescribed it for all lay followers of the Anuvrat program for self-development. This led to an additional innovation since representatives were needed to teach Pariksha Dhyana throughout India and the world. Thus, beginning in 1980, the Therapant introduced the Saman order of intermediary monastic renunciates who were allowed to travel, the large majority of which were and remain Samanis or female Saman. Pariksha Dhyana's dissemination has taken two dimensions. First, in his explication for the monastic or advanced adept, Mahaprajna appropriated metaphysical conceptions from Hatha Yoga with regard to the manipulation of the subtle body for the sake of increasing knowledge of the transcendent self. In this way, he constructed Pariksha Dhyana as part of his ascetic soteriological path, the Jain ascetic ideal. Mahaprajna moves back and forth rather abruptly between an ascetic system of bodywork and a de-asceticized affirmation of the body as a tool for self-realization. As an ascetic system for Jain monastics and advanced adepts, Pariksha Dhyana serves to purify the self from the body and to bring about the experience of the self. Here, a meditational program is central to the practice of Pariksha Dhyana. It does not involve posture except for the preliminary adoption of an appropriate meditative posture, though a variety of stretching and muscle building exercises that are popular in the postural yoga world are accepted as preliminary steps because increased bodily flexibility and strength are believed to contribute to the practitioner's ability to meditate comfortably and for long periods of time. Though postural exercises are preliminary to the central meditative program for monastics and other advanced adepts, Mahaprajna prescribed them for everybody as a solution to what he deemed illnesses of modernity, and especially urban lifestyles linked to a diet of unhealthy non-vegetarian foods, lack of exercise, overconsumption, and increased stress. Mahaprajna associated each yoga posture with certain physiological benefits with regard to basic aches and pains and cures of chronic illnesses such as heart disease and diabetes. He also associated each part of the subtle body with a physiological component. Despite the biomedical discourse, a distinctly Jain soteriology remains, and thus improving the body is a means, not an end in itself. In this way, Mahaprajna echoes Vivekananda and Gandhi, who suggested that the physical benefits of yoga were inferior to what was considered its true spiritual aim. According to Mahaprajna, the healthy body is a means for perceiving the self, which lies buried within the body beneath layers upon layers of gross and subtle body. Prekshadhyana can make the digging through such layers possible. This is why it's often referred to as insight meditation. In the second dimension of Prekshadhyana's dissemination, Mahaprajna joined modern spiritual seekers, joined Vivekananda and Gandhi, I jumped ahead a line, who constructed new yoga systems meant for large target audiences of modern spiritual seekers. Though Mahaprajna found himself in a context where modern postural yoga was increasingly popularly valorized, above and beyond philosophical or soteriological yoga systems. Thus, the second dimension of his dissemination is particularly visible in the yoga classes at the JVB centers where the Samanis teach and where the central and marginal dimensions of Prekshadhyana are actually reversed. In the frequently offered yoga classes by the Samanis, they focus primarily on modern yoga postures, and the central aspects of the meditational program are largely ignored. The Samanis echo Vivekananda, Gandhi, and Mahaprajna's assertion that yoga's health-enhancing techniques are simply means to self-realization. Yet, as a practical response to most people's exclusive concern with health, the Samanis often focus on the health benefits of the yoga postures. While Mahaprajna and his Samani disciples regularly cite the Yoga Sutra with a tone that assumes its authoritative role as a source on yoga, the text is never identified as the most ancient or original systematic source. Instead, everything useful in yoga is believed to predate the Yoga Sutra and to instead have ancient Jain origins going back to Mahavira himself. As an example, consider Mahaprajna's discussion of avadhi-jnana, or limited knowledge, a term that refers to the parapsychological abilities attained through yoga. Avadhi-jnana is limited insofar it is not omniscient, but it surpasses ordinary knowledge. Mahaprajna's disciples translate the term as clairvoyance, which most often refers to perception beyond normal sensory abilities. This term is an important term in pre-modern yoga literature where it refers to a state of consciousness characterized by supernormal knowledge, a preliminary stage on the path to the omniscient state of kevala jnana, or isolated knowledge, meaning knowledge isolated from all karma and thus all-encompassing. As described by Padmanabh S. Cheney, that one's always tough, who Chris discussed a little bit in his opening. In addition to other qualities, this state is often associated with the jnas before they achieve kevala jnana. Quote, and this is from Jain, certain fantastic attributes are popularly held to characterize the jina to be. He is born with a special body, its frame having an adamantine quality. Such a body is considered necessary if he is to withstand the terrible rigors of meditation, intense enough to bring salvation in the present life. As a psychic corollary to his physical aspect, he possesses supermundane cognition, avadhi-jnana, by means of which he may perceive objects and events at enormous distances. Similarly, a fixed and rather stylized set of supernatural occurrences is said to mark his career. End quote. Now, according to Mahaprajna, mention of this supernormal knowledge in ancient Jain literature is evidence that Jain yoga can be found in that literature. His logic is as follows. If any living beings achieved this state of supernormal knowledge, then they must have been participating in the techniques. Is this not loud enough?
It just
too loud?
So,
I think the battery just went out.
Oh, okay.
why don't you unscrew it and screw it back, and sometimes you get a little bit more that way. And because we're filming it, it's good for it to be loud.